All right, good morning. I know most of you, I've either taught your child, I'm teaching your child, or I probably will teach your child. So this is good. It's lots of familiar faces. Very nice. So I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about how we teach our students to read, which seems to be a very mysterious process, especially at our school. So I hope today I can arm you with lots of information and make this less of a mystery overall. So we're going to start with some definitions first. How do we define literacy? That's kind of the main question here. Broadly speaking, obviously literacy is the ability to read and write. And early literacy is therefore the ability to read and write at an early age. That's, early literacy is kind of an education buzzword nowadays, or combo buzzword. The opposite, illiteracy, is the inability to read and write. Studies vary on how to define illiteracy, but we do know this. In a 10-year study from the Program for the International Assessment of Adult Competencies, approximately 88% of American adults cannot read past an 8th grade level. 88% of American adults cannot read high school grade level texts. 18% of that group are functionally illiterate. We're talking about the United States. We are pretty low in terms of our literacy levels. If you have a college education and you can read at a college level, you're in the top 3 to 5% of readers in America, essentially. Obviously, those are abysmal statistics, and we take that very seriously. So if you're functionally illiterate, you cannot fill out a job application, can't read a newspaper. I mean, most people don't read newspapers nowadays anyway, but you can't read the news or anything like that. Because these are concerning numbers, I want us to keep them in mind kind of as we move forward and talk about how we teach students to read and why we do it the way that we do. So first, I want to give you a better idea of our philosophy of literacy and how we holistically teach that. We'll take a close look at our main curriculum that we use for spelling, writing, and reading instruction. And then there's a couple of scope and sequence type papers in there. Did everybody get a packet? Yes? Oh, Tricia, you need one? Okay. So we'll look at those more in depth. We have a reading progression checklist, which will show some hard skills that we're expecting from our students at our school from year to year in the lower school. And then we'll look at some formal and informal assessments that we've implemented at different grade levels. And then discuss ways that you can support your child's reading at home. So our approach to literacy is twofold. First, it stems from our understanding that the system for teaching children to read for decades now is severely flawed. And second, we believe deeply in the intersection of literature, discussion, and the divine. Everything Mr. Mueller just talked about was the perfect segue into this. When children learn to read at our school, they're able to participate fully in following the logos, whether that's in a great books class or geometry in the upper school or a simple read aloud time or nature study in the lower school. And our choice in curriculum reflects our beliefs about best practices for teaching students to be lifelong readers and writers, lifelong learners, right? So our curriculum, if you haven't seen it, is Spell to Write and Read by Wanda Sinceri, and she has a great speech in the actual book itself that I'll kind of pull from in the next few paragraphs here. So she's a teacher and a creator of this curriculum, and she identified 3 major problems with the way reading is typically taught in most schools, and whether it's public or private schools. 1, whole word instruction. 2, faulty phonics instruction. And 3, separating spelling and reading instruction. I think we've all heard at some point in our lives that English is confusing, illogical, and full of exceptions to the rules, right? The funny thing is, most people don't know the rules. And many people go through life just memorizing the exceptions, right? I'm here to tell you there are keys to unlocking the English language, and we have them available to us. So whole word instruction has been the go-to for reading instruction for a long time. It's quicker to have children memorize words to begin reading at a younger age. However, there are 500,000 words in the English language, so we can never expect to memorize them all, right? No one memorizes that. Many people likely unlock the rules to the English language without even realizing it, and others may never get the rules unless it's explicitly given to them. So I'm a product of the Texas public school system. I went through public school K through 12th grade, and then I went to a public university. And when I was in kindergarten, we were taught a hybrid of whole words and phonics. Phonics was typically used to teach the single letter sounds, the alphabet basically. And then we did word families, sight words, all of that. We weren't really taught to differentiate when you're reading, how to know when to use a long or short vowel sound, right? You just memorize those in groups in like word families, right? We did decode, simple like consonant, vowel, consonant words, but then what about all the pesky English exceptions? We just memorized those, right? Sight word style. For me, reading just clicked. I came by it naturally. It never occurred to me that I had figured out something about the English language that remained a mystery to many of my struggling peers. I didn't have a word for it then, but I do now. Phonics. Phonics is the key, and phonics is all we do. There are 70 phonograms. I've got all my cards here. So we got all these nice phonogram cards. This is what we learned from. There's 28 spelling rules. I did not bring my spelling rule cards. Got those. That's okay. And according to Wanda Sinceri, there are, with these two tools in hand, you can phonetically explain 99% of words in the English language. So we don't have to expect children to rely on word memory or random guessing through context clues if we give phonics instruction early, directly, systematically, and intensively. So we're going to take a closer look at this curriculum since it's like our main way that we teach reading. I guess teach reading in the lower school, lower grades. I mean, once they get into the upper grades of the lower school, this is used to support their reading skills and obviously to expand what they know. So Spell to Write and Read is a comprehensive phonics-based curriculum created by Wanda Sinceri, as I said earlier. It's based on the Writing Road to Reading curriculum produced by Romalda Spalding. So a lot of people are familiar with that curriculum. It's pretty old. So this one's a little more new. I don't even know the first publication date. I think maybe in the 70s. So it's newer, but not that much new. So the curriculum teaches spontaneous reading through systematic spelling instruction. So let's break down what that means essentially. Each year, Spell to Write and Read builds on the previous year and follows a logical progression as follows. So 1, students begin by learning the sounds of speech called phonograms. Those are the phonogram cards that I held up earlier. There are 26 single letter phonograms. So, we got one for each letter of the alphabet here. And 54 multi-letter phonograms. So these are examples of those. Like that's SH, CH, TH, double E, all of those. Which create a total of 45 sounds that you use in 70 basic ways. Then 2, penmanship is taught immediately from the beginning of the curriculum. As students are introduced to the phonograms, they learn how to write the phonograms. In cursive, we do cursive from the beginning, using our cursive first curriculum, which I'm just gonna hold up. There's nothing really interesting about the book, but here it is. From there, so we do that, we do that in the early grades using a multisensory approach. So in pre-K, obviously, they're doing this, just building fine motor skills. But in kindergarten, we begin with everything from like taking water and paint brushes on the sidewalk and practicing writing the phonograms that way. We have salt boxes, like literally boxes with black paper on the bottom, and then we put salt in them, so they're writing in the salt. There's a lot of benefit to writing up on a board, so we'll do like a chalkboard with chalk, or a whiteboard with expo markers. I'm trying to think, there's one more that we do. Can't even remember what it is. But like in their centers that they have in my class, they'll like form the letters out of Play-Doh too. So those are all multisensory approaches that they're going to use in kindergarten, some in first grade, but usually by first grade, they've moved on to paper pencil type things. So saying and writing the phonograms in isolation creates the letter-sound connection for students, which is the first stage of reading. The curriculum uses Dr. Chaw's stages of reading, which we'll look at a little bit later. It's in your packet, but we'll get there. 3, once students know the phonograms, they move into learning words from the spelling lists. So as they learn new words, they're taught spelling markings that correspond to the spelling rules, which are also taught at the same time. This teaches students to think logically and avoid guesswork in both the spelling and the reading process. So they do all of this. You may or may not have seen these. They don't usually go home. In kindergarten, we do not use this book. We're just working on how to figure out how to use paper and pencils. The lines are pretty small. So usually they'll start using this in first grade. There's pages for their spelling lists. There's also reference pages in the back that they'll fill out as they go along as they're learning particular spelling rules. So for example, there's like from the beginning, they're going to figure out which letters are consonants and which are vowels. And then later, obviously, the spelling rules become a little more complicated, like rules for using SH and when to use the sh phonogram in a word. And when it's actually, there's 3 other phonograms that say sh, so they have to learn when to use those. And then for the upper grades, this is 3rd grade and up, they use the Black Learning Log, which is essentially empty in a lot of ways. It has some more complicated rule pages. So they're filling out more things in there as they go along. They're doing, more complicated words, so there's more things happening. Yes?
Did you guys add to the curriculum, like Y says yeah, it, I, E, since it says, like in this curriculum it drove me nuts because it would have you do Y is it, even though it says it 10,000 times.
Oh no, you're asking me the question that's just like the words. Yes.
And so we started at home saying like two or more syllable words, Y says E. Because like otherwise I just...
Yeah.
But do you guys do that here?
So we've had 2 different things actually, and it's been a change from last year to this year. We had a previous curriculum instructor who came and taught the curriculum to us, and she insisted on when you teach Y, you teach Y, I, and E, right? So like at the end of the word baby, then they know that Y can make the E sound. We did another training last year, though, that was insistent on the I-Y connection. So that's a whole section in this book, and I will gladly make copies of it for you if you want. But basically, at some point in the English language, Y was had an I sound. So there's it's lost that, obviously. I am currently teaching them, we've only encountered it one time in the word baby. It's in one of the further lists, like, that most of my kids haven't gotten to. But one group I had get there, and I did teach it as I. You, like, sound it out, b-a, b-I. And they think to spell it that way, but then when we say it, we say baby. So that should be how all of our grades are teaching it now. We're trying to stick closely to the curriculum. Otherwise, you get all kinds of stuff going on. Granted, we probably do have some 2nd graders and 3rd graders who heard the y-I-E, and they're like, wait a second, what's happening here? But hopefully with reteaching, that will be okay. Good question, though. That's like a point of contention probably within the phonics world. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people do. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so now I'm like off from here. No, you're good. That was a really good question. So spelling markings, yes. Okay, so then once they learn the phonograms, we move into doing words from the spelling list. So as they learn new words, they're being taught these spelling markings, right? So I showed you those copies of the learning logs, and I wanted to do one example from one of our spelling lists. So I'm going to grab spelling list A. So everyone does spelling list A, whether you're in kindergarten or third grade. Well, probably not third grade. Usually, we'll get to that. Usually you're going to skip ahead a little bit. So for example, if we do the word be. So literally this is how I will teach my class. I'll say, okay, at the top of your page, we're going to write the word be. I gotta remember my script here. So think to spell be. I don't have the sentence, I'm sorry. Normally I would read a sentence and I would say be, and then I would say think to spell be. Help me sound it out. And then I'll use fingergrams. I'll say b-e. This is the second sound of e, so they know. Then we'll say, repeat the way we think it. They'll say be, because we're not thinking to spell any way differently than you would just say the word. And then I'll say it as you write it. So then they are starting to say the sounds as they're writing them. I'll wait till they're finished, and then I'll have them read the word back to me, and then sound it out for me so that I can write it. And they'll say b-e, okay? And then we'll look at it. I'll say, does yours look like mine? They'll check it. And they'll say, any spelling markings? And usually by this point, they'll know the spelling markings. So B is not a complicated word. It does use one spelling rule that A, E, O, and U say A, E, O, and U at the end of a syllable. So they'll know, well, we'll clap the syllables at some point. They'll know that this is a one-syllable word, and E is at the end, so it's saying its name, right? So we're going to underline it. So they'll tell me, okay, underline it. There's tons of words that end like that, right? Me. That would be another one. So as soon as they've seen this, they can start applying it to other words, right? Another example of that would be the word is. So we go through the whole script, and then at the end we sound out, okay, is. Okay, well we know that's not a z. I would tell them this is the letter that sometimes says z. There's no spelling rule for that though. They just know then that sometimes S can say z. So we would sound it out all together and then write it up here. And the spelling marking looks the same, right? It's a second sound, so usually we put a 2 over it, sorry. So for second and third sounds, you're going to number them. Usually it's just the spelling rule where you underline. So those are just 2 examples from where they're applying those things. Oh, there's no eraser. Okay. This can be a little more complicated, obviously, as you get to higher spelling lists. Now, I don't ever teach these lists, so bear with me. We'll see if I can do this. I want to give you an example from, this is spelling list L3. So this is quite a bit further along in the spelling list. We don't get to this in kindergarten. They don't get to it in first grade. I don't know, Megan, do y'all do it in second grade?
We are on J5 right now, so.
Oh, you're getting there.
We're about to break into the L's. The kids are thrilled. Yeah, they keep thinking, we're getting to Z.
Oh my gosh. So if we're spelling the word rise, this is a good word where it has a second sound and it uses a spelling rule. So we're spelling the word rise. Sorry, I'm terrible at writing on boards, my goodness. All right. Poor children have to suffer. Okay. Okay, so in this case, right, we already know that S can say Z, so we're underlining. Let me double check, because I don't do this one. I'm sorry, I always want to underline it. It's a 2. And then we know we have a spelling rule, a silent E rule, so we're going to double underline our silent E. And in this case, it's the first rule where E is making the I say I. So to make that connection, we're going to draw a little arc over there. So this is just an example of, second sounds plus spelling rules. So they can get kind of complicated. There can be multiple things going on there. And they obviously, because the spelling lists get more complicated, the words get more complicated, they'll have had plenty of practice with it by the time they get there. So Another component of this is as they move through the spelling list, they begin to compose original sentences using the spelling words. In the younger grades, they'll compose sentences orally. I don't have my kids write sentences yet. They can't sit through that. Then, after mastering, at some point in the curriculum, after they've mastered 150 of the spelling words, or at least been re-exposed to them, especially like in first grade or second grade, they begin writing their own sentences. I know in third grade, this looks like they'll do a whole list, basically in one go, and then Ms. Mikey will ask them to compose a sentence or a couple of sentences using at least 10 of the words from that list. So they'll immediately practice writing those again. And there's a whole little section in the Black Learning Log on where to put those. As they write and as they're composing those sentences, they're learning basic grammar principles. So it's in application to their own original writing. That's like the building blocks there. They're looking at their own writing before they are exposed to anything else. And through reinforcement activities. The book is chock full of extra things to do to supplement and reinforce and all of that, and I have a whole list of those in the back of your little packet for you to take home, straight from the curriculum. In second grade and up, we just implemented this for second grade this year. It used to be third grade and up. They're using well-ordered language as a grammar supplement. Like, it has some very specific lessons on specific grammar principles. So it's a little less. Not to say that applying grammar principles to their original writing using spell to write and read is abstract, but this is a very clear-cut, like, we're diagramming sentences, we're talking about parts of speech, that kind of thing. There's very specific lessons related to that. So for example, I wanted to show you, sorry, I keep turning back here, but it's like this table is not well placed. If we look at, wrong book, back on spelling list, for example, as early as spelling list A, there are, or we'll look at spelling list B, that's fine. Oh, here it is. As early as spelling list A, so like what I would be doing in kindergarten, there are enrichment activities there that are supportive of grammar principles. So they'll be, doing things like identifying words on the list that are verbs or nouns and things like that. And we can talk about that. We usually talk about that stuff orally in our class. And actually, by this point, they know enough words that we've made our own very simple sentences, like literally, I run. They're like, oh, yeah, okay, that's what the sentence is about. That's the subject, right? And then run, the verb. Okay, those two things together make a sentence. So they're already putting those together. Even if they're not writing it, I'm writing it on the board, or some of them are writing it. They're already thinking about those things at that stage. So spontaneous reading is the result as students build spelling words from the part to the whole. Some students will make this connection between spelling and reading instantly. Others are going to take more time. We don't worry so much about how fast a student learns to read. Rather, we teach enduring principles that produce long-term success. After students are fluently recognizing words, we begin comprehension assessments. So it's useless, or you can do comprehension assessments if you're reading aloud to them, right? That's the basic read aloud principle. I can ask them questions about what they've heard. But until they're reading fluently, you wouldn't assess them on what they've read, obviously. Usually this starts around third grade. I don't know, maybe Mrs. Muller is doing some of that in her second grade class, but we don't have like a particular curriculum for that, for comprehension assessments. No, so third grade.
We're building our own.
Exactly. Yeah. So third grade would use the McCall-Krabs test lessons in reading, which looks a little bit like this. It's just a huge book of short paragraphs, and then it has some little questions underneath. Now, they haven't been using these very often because there's other ways to test comprehension as well. So this is a supplement, but you can also, a teacher could just create a comprehension assessment based on what they're reading in class, right? So at this stage, like when they're being tested on comprehension, they can read anything that of interest to them at that point. Like they should be reading fluently enough that they can pick and choose what they want to read, besides reading for class. Okay, so this is a lot of information, right? Some of it maybe you already know, some of it might be new. You may be wondering where your child falls in this process, or maybe you know exactly where they are. Many parents come to me and they wonder if their child is behind in comparison to their peers or students at other schools, and we have a few things to say about that. So Mrs. Gilbert told me that she tells most parents of incoming students to our school, especially parents of young children in the pre-K to first grade range, that students reading and writing at our school may appear behind in those first few years. The nature of the curriculum is slow moving and steady. And we've found in the past few years, we've only been around 4 years, but we've been able to track it, that students begin more slowly than their peers in other programs, but the gap lessens steadily through their third grade year. So by the end of third grade, no difference. That's the expectation, and that's what we've seen. So the end of third grade, for your average student, right? The end of third grade is a particular milestone, like in the literacy world. Research on literacy and future academic success show that students who read below grade level, or who read below grade level, will continue, or if they continue to struggle with reading into fourth grade and beyond, have a lot of risks. Like they're at risk for dropping out, they have lower college entrance exam scores, and general academic and social struggles into high school years. So with that in mind, we've created a scope and sequence for our language arts in the lower school that hopefully is supportive of that not happening for our students. So this is where your little packet comes in handy. On the front page is our language arts scope and sequence for kindergarten through fifth grade. And this is mostly a curriculum scope and sequence. It's going to walk you through some very broad, I'm not going to go through it, it's very detailed, but there's some broad skills that are marked on here in the listening, speaking, reading, and writing categories. And then there are also the specific curriculums written out here. The only thing on here that hadn't been edited was where is that? Well-ordered language should be under grammar and mechanics. Oh, no, it is. Okay, it is included on second grade, so it has been edited. Okay, so that's all up to date. So that's a curriculum map plus some more broad skills. If you turn the page, this is a progression that I put together over the last summer that is more of a detailed kind of look at the hard reading and writing skills that students would ideally master from year to year while they're here. Obviously, there's some flexibility here. Children are not robots. Some may struggle a little bit in certain years, and then they, make up that time. Especially we see this in like kindergarten and beginning of first grade, and sometimes even into second grade, but usually it kind of evens out. So before we look at this, we have to remember that learning to read and read well is the process that continues throughout a student's life in the lower school and well into the upper school, right? Like just because they can read fluently by the end of their time in the lower school doesn't mean their comprehension skills may be all that great. They may still be working on reading well at that stage. Just because your child reads fast does not mean they're getting the information, right? A lot of times we put a lot of emphasis on, all right, they can read 150 words per minute, great, but what do they know? What are they taking away from what they're reading? So as I mentioned earlier, we track reading progression using 12 stages of reading development. This is on the, if you turn the page again, this is like a complicated table, but it's at the bottom here. With stage 1 through 4. So stage 1, we link letters and sounds. That's the phonograms. Stage 2 is mastering the alphabet code for quick and automatic response. We're doing this all the time. Stage 3, developing comprehension skills, reading to discover author's intent. And then 4 is building higher level analytical skills. And all of these correspond sort of, to our different grade level expectations with flexibility there. I cannot emphasize enough that all of our children are individual people, right? And if we're teaching them holistically, we have to take into account a lot of different factors when we're looking at where they're at. Starting with pre-kindergarten, obviously this is kind of stage 1. They're learning to link letters and sounds. The areas of focus are in 2 places here, phonemic awareness and phonics. So our pre-kindergarten students do a lot of wordplay, obviously. They rhyme, they count syllables, identify beginning sounds, they're orally blending and segmenting words. They're exposed to the cursive strokes and see the cursive letters, but the bulk of their writing is pre-writing activities aimed at building their fine motor control. Students are exposed to the phonograms for the first time. They begin to understand the connection between letters and sounds. A lot of times, we'll hear about pre-K programs where you've got 4-year-olds who are reading. Great. Wonderful. We have some 4-year-olds who are reading here. That's beautiful. We don't push it though. We forget, honestly, that 50 plus years ago, most people learned to read in 1st grade. So there's really no reason for a child who's struggling with figuring out the connection between letters and sounds when they're 4, that has no indication, it doesn't indicate that they're going to struggle with reading for the rest of their life, right? It just means they're not ready. Great, there's kindergarten and there's 1st grade still to go. So that's a good thing. So many students move on to kindergarten. I'm not saying all students, but many, all of them move on with an exposure to the phonograms, but some of them may move on with no real understanding yet that those letters and sounds carry potential for communication and meaning. It may be still a little abstract to them, like, okay, I'm looking at these things and we're saying these sounds, but they may see them out of context like that and still not understand that those things mean something, and that's okay. Kindergarten is going to continue to focus on phonemic awareness activities, especially at the beginning of the year, and we do an introduction, or if they've been in pre-K with us, a reintroduction to the single letter phonograms in conjunction with writing now. So this is a little bit different. In the pre-K, they're not yet writing those phonograms when they're seeing them. They're mostly just seeing and then building the fine motor control. We will teach, like I said, using multisensory things. We'll teach the phonograms, the single letter phonograms. They'll begin to learn the multi-letter phonograms. This is mostly through exposure. Like I'm showing them the cards. We practice linking those. We use that actually, the multi-letter phonograms, to practice linking letters together before we move on to the spelling list. They'll learn them in the order that they come across them in the spelling lists. And we make sure we expose them to all 70 of the phonograms before they move on to 1st grade. Obviously, we're expecting mastery or close to mastery of those single letter phonograms by the end of the year. For the multi-letter phonograms, though, like if they can get down SH, CH, TH, and start like figuring out that 2 letters together sometimes make a sound, or 3 letters together, that's a good place to be. So most students by the end of that year are beginning to apply the alphabetic principle and spelling rules to read and write. And that can look very different. It could be, for example, I had a student the other day, we were talking about habitats, and she said, I want to write, I like the Arctic. And I said, okay, well, we've done all of those spelling words. I bet if you sound it out to yourself, you can do it. She got I, she got like with the silent E, she got the, and then she got to Arctic, and she was like, nope, don't know that one. But she sounded it out, and she put a K in there, but she got really close. I was pretty impressed. So they're beginning to do that, right? Like they're beginning to play with the words like that and kind of figure that out with my guidance, of course. I did end up writing it on the board so she could see like how to spell it. But so kindergarten students are really ramping up their reading in the 2nd semester. That's where we see that. A lot of times in other programs, you'll see kindergartners who are expected to do reading right away in the 1st semester. We don't really do that until 2nd semester. We're doing it right now. We will build fluency by reading words from previous spelling lists. So the spelling lists we did in the fall into the spring are the ones we're working on. Specifically, this is a great little book, the New England Primer, super old, super great. It has basic introductory words which correspond directly to our curriculum. These are from the first 4 spelling lists, 100 words, and we work on these. Like, this is what I want them going through. So we make little word cards, we read them, we practice reading the words in isolation, and eventually, actually at this point, I've printed this list out. Okay. And we're reading through it. Like, we're just reading down the list. Like, we're building fluency with those words before we start, taking out other books and reading those books. A lot of times people will push before kids even really know any whole words, like by sight at that point, decodable readers and things like that, which is fine, but a lot of times kids will get really frustrated, right? Like, they'll know some words and then there will be a lot of words they don't know. So when you expose them to a bunch of words like that and give them the skills to decode those words, eventually, right, those do become sight words in a sense. They become automatic. And then when they know those, then they can pick up a book that has some words they don't know, but has a lot of words they do know, and the frustration is a lot less. So we use that, and then we'll start using phonics-based readers as well a little later in this semester. So we can expect some students to be reading in kindergarten a grade level text at about 20 to 30 words per minute by the end of the year, or, like, don't freak out if you're a kindergarten parent, you're like, oh my gosh, my child can't do this, or leading up into first grade. Is this a hard number? No, not at all. It's kind of my personal goal, and this is sort of where research falls, but if your child's not reading at that level by the time they're going into first grade, it is okay. We are okay with that. Like, it will be fine. We have no formal assessments for spelling in kindergarten, other than I do some diagnostic spelling tests as a preview for them, sort of like getting them used to the idea that this will be something they would be assessed on. And it gives me a better idea of, like, do they actually know these letters? Or are they relying on me, to give them the cues and things like that? So the goal, though, of kindergarten is exposure to as many words from the spelling list as possible. It is not mastery, although they will master things over the course of the year. As an example, in my own class, related to reading, like, words per minute scores, I just did a reading assessment. Most of my kids were falling in the 5 to 10 word per minute range. Awesome. We have 2 more months of school, and they will, like, skyrocket by the end, and over the summer too, you usually see a lot of that. So with first grade, this is where you see a little bit of a shift. So first grade, the phonemic awareness activities drop off. They don't really emphasize them as much. They might do a little bit at the beginning of the year, and emphasis is placed on the mastery of material. So students will know their single and multi-letter phonograms. They'll apply the alphabetic principle and their spelling rules to read and write. And by mid-year, they should be able to read fluently from a list of most common words, like in the blue primer, and grade level texts at about 50 to 80 words per minute. That's around mid-year. It can be flexible with that, obviously. It's kind of different because we have a long Christmas break too, so a lot of times if you assess that after Christmas break, you'll see a big drop, and then if you assess it a month later, it's like all of a sudden everybody's like really high. Spelling mastery is assessed frequently. They have regular list quizzes, and then they do diagnostic spelling tests after they've reached a certain spelling list. Second and third grade look very similar to first grade in terms of mastery and application of phonograms, spelling rules, spelling mastery, alphabetic principle. A second grader can be expected to read a grade level text at about 100 words per minute by mid-year. That's plus or minus 15. A third grader should be making steady progress toward a fifth grade goal of reading grade level text at 120 to 150 words per minute. So they're doing that through fourth grade as well, like working toward that goal. At that point, it's just fluency. And then a fifth grader, and this is especially important because they're starting to read some pretty intense stuff in their great books classes in middle school. A fifth grader should be reading at about 150 words per minute with spelling mastery well above grade level. So in fifth grade, the formal spelling instruction drops off. Up until that point, like, oh, Megan, let me double check this. Are y'all doing 40 words a week or 20 words? 30. You do 30. Okay. That's right. It ramps up.
Because we're building a lot of sentences.
Yes. Okay. So in kindergarten, I teach 10 words a week. In first grade, this is about 20 words a week. And then in second grade, we ramp up to 30. Third and fourth grade should be doing about 40 words per week. And then it drops off in 5th grade from 40 to 20 because the emphasis now is on developing vocabulary, strengthening comprehension, and then polishing their composition skills, which of course they're working on in other grades as well, but they should have more mastery over their spelling words at that point. So there are 50 plus spelling lists in this book, denoted with the letters, like you said. We were talking about, like, oh, 2nd grade wants to get to Z. Okay, well, yeah, that's not going to happen in their 2nd grade year, right? That would be pretty crazy. Mastery, if students have mastery of words from list A through I, that is 60% of all the words we read and write. Like, that's a big deal. We do list I in kindergarten. So already at the end of kindergarten, they've been exposed to 60% of the words we read and write. Students will receive repeated exposure to all of those words from the beginning of kindergarten. They may not repeat those words, obviously, as they get into the higher grades because they've already mastered them and they're experiencing them in their reading and writing on a regular basis. By the time they get to 5th grade, because of the way the spelling lists work, they will have a spelling mastery ranging from anywhere from the 6th grade level to a freshman level in college. Obviously, we're shooting higher than the 6th grade level if we want them to, go on into the upper school. So, but that's kind of where they would fall. This is a lot of components, right, and a lot of things to track. So there are several ways that we monitor progress, and some of that can be confusing to communicate out to parents, like how we check where students are. There are 5 areas of assessment in the Spell to Write and Read curriculum that they use to track progress. So we're going to spotlight those plus one particular reading assessment that we began using this year that's been very successful. So Spell to Write and Read assesses spelling, reading, comprehension, oral reading fluency, sometimes it's called oral reading ability, writing ability, and penmanship. In the early grades, a student's phonogram knowledge is also tested regularly. Like, we do a quarterly phonogram assessment where I'll just hold the cards up and we'll flash through them and they have to tell me what the phonogram is. And you can do this with the multi-letter phonograms too in the other grades. But at some point, obviously, they should know those, so we stop that assessment. After students complete spelling list G, then they start diagnostic spelling tests, which are part of the curriculum. It's a whole list in the back. The test mastery over words that are selected from spelling lists A through G. And to give you an idea of the range of the diagnostic spelling test, it's able, the range that it gives, a student who gets one word correct is placed at a 1st grade spelling level. So if any of my kids spell literally the first word on the first test is go. If they spell it correct, they're placed at a 1st grade level. And then for each correct word after that, it moves up a couple of months in terms of spelling mastery because it's testing a range of words from a variety of lists. So you could have a 1st grader who's, testing at a 3rd grade level easily. After kindergarten, the diagnostic spelling tests are given at the beginning of the school year just to see where everybody's at, and that usually determines where you start as a class. So sometimes, you've got a group that is really struggling kind of as a whole, and most of them are, still working out some of the beginning words. So they may go back to a beginning list, like list A. Ideally, that wouldn't happen, but it happens sometimes. So an oral reading sample assesses a student's smoothness, accuracy, speed, and enunciation when reading a grade level text. So students can be reassessed on this using the same text throughout the year. That way you're not throwing something new at them that is going to kind of mess up your ability to view their progress, essentially. And this can be a regularly occurring assessment in 1st grade and up. I don't test that in kindergarten, obviously. They're just figuring out reading. So teachers in all grades use students' learning logs and other writing samples to assess composition. And like in kindergarten, that's very basic. I'm looking for can they order things from top to bottom, left to right orientation, that kind of thing. Eventually it's okay, we're writing sentences. Now we're writing paragraphs. How are we organizing those things? And then penmanship is, there's several components to that. as basic as like, can they form this letter and can I read it? Are they doing, the big thing would be, are we doing the correct strokes in the correct order in the correct direction? Those would be the three main things. And then third grade and up, they're doing comprehension assessments using that McCall-Krabs test lessons or any comprehension assessments over grade level text that they're reading in class. Now, a more formal assessment that we implemented this year, which you have kind of a little parent information thing in your packet here. It's like if I go to the official website, this is like what they want you to print up, just information. It's the University of Oregon's DIBELS test. It's a dynamic indicator of basic early literacy skills. It's a nationally used assessment for tracking reading progress, identifying students at risk for reading difficulties. Reading specialists use this. If you go to like reading, like centers for reading skills, like for dyslexia or anything like that, they might use this assessment as well to figure out whether a student is at risk or not. It's made up of several 1-minute assessments, so that's a big part of it. It's a quick assessment, so it's already assessing their fluency right from the beginning. That change depending on the grade level. So kindergarten is doing phonemic segmentation fluency. That's how well a student can segment words orally. They do that one in first grade, and then it drops off. That's a phonemic awareness skill. If they, they don't need to test that past first grade because they're not focusing on that anymore. Nonsense word fluency is one that they do through most of the grades. That's how well a student can apply phonogram knowledge and alphabetic principle. It seems kind of strange. They're literally reading nonsense words, but it's a huge indicator. If they're doing poorly on that, but they're reading, usually we see it like with students who might come from another school where they did whole word instruction, where they're doing the next assessment, word reading fluency, really well, and then they're doing very poorly, though, on nonsense word reading or the phonemic segmentation fluency if they're in first grade, because they don't have the phonics foundation. So usually, though, you can catch that up so that things even out a little bit more. So word reading fluency, like I said, is how many grade level words the student can read in isolation. And then the last one is oral reading fluency and accuracy. We don't test that one in kindergarten. That one starts in first grade. And that's how quickly and accurately a student can read a grade level text. Obviously, the emphasis there is both on how quickly, but also, accuracy is a huge component. Plenty of students read very quickly, but their accuracy scores are very low. So the emphasis there would be like, okay, it's okay to slow down and to make sure that we're getting meaning from this in a good way. There's one more assessment. It's a comprehension assessment offered by DIBELS. It's called the Maze assessment. We don't use it. It doesn't correspond very well to the spell to write and read curriculum, so we rely on the McCall-Krabs or any comprehension assessments that the teacher creates. Yes?
So I got a question.
Yeah.
So I've seen the test scores come back
Yes.
for my son several times, and
Yeah.
going from kindergarten to first grade,
Mm-hmm.
he's doing better. But
Great.
He's really good on the nonsense words, but when it comes to reading the paragraph that's there, it overwhelms him. So,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So is that a normal thing for that?
So this is where we would look at scores more holistically, right? Okay. So the DIBELS, because we don't use the Maze comprehension assessment, and there's also one for the younger grades called letter naming fluency, which does not correspond with our curriculum at all because we don't do letter names, right? We're doing sounds. We drop those off. Now that makes things kind of difficult because you can score the assessments using a composite score, which gives you add up all the scores, and then it gives you a picture, kind of an overall picture, but we can't do that, right? Because we're not using two of the tests. So we're taking raw scores, which there's always some flaws, right, in just looking at raw test data. So it's kind of where we have to take it and then look holistically at where the child is, right? So in that case, I would say if I've got a student who's doing really well with the first two assessments, like phonemic segmentation fluency, okay, that tells me their phonemic awareness skills are good, right? If they're doing well with that. Nonsense word fluency tells me they have a solid foundation of the phonograms and they're either applying or beginning to apply the alphabetic principle, like they can use those phonograms to sound things out. Then if oral reading fluency is struggling, that just means they're going to need to read more, right? It just means, like, the way we deal with that is reading aloud. That creates fluency. If they're reading aloud to a fluent reader, then that fluent reader can help them figure out new words, right? And I have this a little later, but I'll talk about it now, actually. A lot of parents are worried, or I hear a lot of worries about, like, well, if my child's reading aloud to me, what if I don't know, like, all the phonograms? I mean, you'll know the single letter phonograms likely, but, like, what if I don't know all the specific phonograms or spelling rules or something, and I can't help them sound out the word? Doesn't matter. Just tell them what the word is, right? That's not going to undo every single thing they've learned in school. Sometimes we just need to tell them, and then they'll see that word enough, and they'll just know it eventually, right? And then they may learn it later in a more specific way, breaking it down and learning the rules and all of that. So actually, that's kind of at the very end here, like the number one thing we can do with our kids to improve reading skills, or, you know, to help them if they're struggling, is to have them read aloud to us. If they're a fluent reader already and they're not struggling, I mean, then silent reading obviously is good too for the upper grades. If they're not at the point of reading, then reading to them is the number one big thing. Yeah.
What's that? His reading aloud is not all that great,
Mm-hmm.
but then, like, supposedly on his comprehension test, he's been doing fine.
That's
And
good.
Is that two different parts of the brain?
It can be, yeah.
Potentially
Mm-hmm.
that are not.
Yeah.
I mean, even still, I would tell you that, like, he could read, like, something as a sign and then completely tell me what
Yeah.
it says. But then if he was to read aloud, I'm like, okay, like.
You're like, this is painful. Okay.
Same
Yeah.
boat. We're in the same boat.
Yeah.
His comprehension's great, but like I think it's like overwhelming sometimes if there's too many words.
It can be, yeah, for sure. And in that case, like, it may be, especially in a first grader's case, reading something with less words on the page, like, will help him to gain confidence in that area. But yeah, you can have a disconnect between the comprehension and like their actual reading fluency, because just because they're reading a little slower or struggling through it doesn't necessarily mean that part of the brain that's like comprehending what they're reading is not working. Like, some kids, it's firing all at the same time, right? Like, they're able to comprehend even if they're struggling through reading something.
I think he reads faster silently.
Interesting, yeah, that can be
Which is
true.
weird. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
think it's improved some, but
Hmm.
to me there's still a disparity,
Yeah.
which I don't know.
Huh. I've never heard that, actually. That, like, silent reading's faster, but yeah, usually usually you see if they're, like, struggling to read out loud, that their silent reading is not all that great. Or it could be the case that they're reading out loud and their comprehension's really good, but they read faster silently, but their comprehension's poor, right? I mean, my own sister's like that, actually. Like, she can read, like, silent read super fast, but even as an adult, like, her comprehension's not as good as it is if she just read something out loud. So that can be true for kids too, for sure. Yeah.
Another thing, just as a comment from someone who teaches the curriculum as
Yeah.
well and does the Diagnostic assessment, I do the second grade, and another thing that we all, you guys as parents and we as the teachers, have to sort of live in this tension where we're never going to prepare the students for the test by creating materials that mimic the test.
You're
and
stealing what I
telling
was
the
going to say.
students. So it's overwhelming for
Yeah.
your student to see, the wall of text that the assessment gives them. Even if we know that, we're not going to prep them for hours every week by doing that to them, because we don't think it's necessarily developmentally appropriate. So we want to be able to use the external systems that are in place to sort of to gauge where students are academically, but we're trying, and we're all working together on trying this. That's hopefully why you guys are at our school too. But we have to really resist that temptation as teachers and then as parents to say, well, I want them to perform better on this assessment. Can we practice the assessment in advance? But we're not going to teach to the test. And so we have to, in some cases, we'll get back, the nonsense words. I see this a lot too, where nonsense in some students, where the nonsense words are really strong, which means that they really have taken in what we teach them. But then when they see that, and it's like a terrible centered paragraph, like wall of text on a page. And it's on an 8.5 by 11. It's nothing like a book.
Yeah.
It's not anything like the reading materials we supply for them. And so when they see it, are they going to do their best work on that in that moment? Probably not. And so that's where, you don't want to say take all assessments with a big fat grain of salt. But
No, yeah.
what we do in the classroom isn't going to we're not afraid of those assessments,
Yeah.
and so we're gonna take it not with a big fat grain of salt, but we're not gonna pander to it. I don't know. We're not gonna. Yeah. So that's something that I think about all the time when I look at those assessments for my kids.
You
too.
literally
I know-
stole the words from my
Sorry,
mouth.
I'm so sorry, Sarah. I'm sorry. I should've let you finish.
No, it's okay. No, that was really helpful. I mean, yeah, we will never teach to a test, right? That's not how, I mean, that says something about how we view children and how we teach, right? So, yeah, we take it with a grain of salt. We take it with an appropriate amount of caution, but we want to consider a student's skills in a holistic way. Like, just because they do poorly on one assessment, what if they pick up a book over here and they're reading just fine over here? Okay, I need to take that into consideration, right? Yeah, we're never going to reduce our students down to test scores or results. The only benefit of it is that it's something we can use to compare to other schools, although that's kind of difficult too because we do such a weird thing here, you know? So that's tricky, but mostly it's a good parent communication tool too. Like these are the specific skills that we're still working on. I use it specifically to communicate progress, but also to set goals for kids, right? Like if I'm seeing them struggle in this one area of the assessment, but then they're doing kind of okay with it over here, I'll let parents know that, right? Like this is what I'm seeing, and this is what I think we can do to help that. So it shouldn't be like, yeah, we can't prep for it. There's really no way to prep for it. We just do it. Actually, the test is invalid essentially if you let students look at it ahead of time or prepare for it in any way. Like what we're doing in class should prepare them in a sense, right? We're already at time, but I have one little last thing. We already talked about it though, parent support, right? The number one question I get is how can I help my child to read, right? We already talked about it. If your child is not reading, you can read to them. If your child is reading, have them read aloud to you. If still a good skill, even if they're a good silent reader. Obviously, if they're a good silent reader, please have them read silently. Fluency is built well into 4th and 5th grade. Comprehension continues to grow well past 5th grade. So those are all, like, those skills can continue. Those things should continue. There's the very last thing here is on the very back of that packet. There's a bunch of enrichment activities straight from our Spell to Write and Read curriculum for both writing, comprehension, composition, grammar support, like teaching grammar, having them practice that, and spelling, writing, reading, all of that for each grade level. I didn't include pre-K because they're babies. Like, they're going to be okay. They really are. I mean, yeah, they'll be okay. Just let them be the way they are and read to them and let them have fun and figure out, I don't know, the wonderful thing that language is without, like, forcing it on them. But hopefully this is all helpful to you.